The wedding reception was in full swing when my father cornered me near the champagne fountain, his voice dripping with familiar disappointment. "Tyler, that beat-up Honda you drove here is an embarrassment to this family. What will the Blackwoods think?" He gestured toward my cousin Miranda's new in-laws, their designer suits gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. "You're 28 years old, son. When are you going to get your act together? I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." My mother appeared beside him, shaking her head as she adjusted her pearl necklace. "Honestly, Tyler, couldn't you have at least rented something decent for Miranda's special day? That car looks like it belongs in a junkyard." The mockery in her voice cut deeper than any stranger's words ever could. But what they didn't know was that in exactly 3 hours, my chauffeur would be opening the door to my private jet, and their entire world was about to shift forever. The morning of my cousin Miranda's wedding started like any other Saturday in Riverside Heights, Connecticut. I pulled my 15-year-old Honda Civic into the country club parking lot, the engine making that familiar rattling sound it had developed over the past few months. The vehicle looked particularly shabby next to the rows of BMWs, Mercedes, and Teslas that filled the premium spots near the entrance. I'd driven this car for 3 years now, ever since I'd moved back to town. It had 180,000 miles on it, a dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot incident, and paint that had faded from navy blue to something resembling dusty gray. But it got me where I needed to go, and that was all that mattered to me. The Riverside Country Club was exactly the kind of venue my family expected for weddings. Sprawling manicured lawns, a clubhouse that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and a price tag that could fund a small business. Miranda had been planning this day for 2 years, and no expense had been spared. The parking lot alone told the story. Valets in crisp white jackets directing guests toward the main entrance, where a red carpet led up marble steps. As I walked toward the entrance, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. My suit was decent, navy blue, well-tailored, though it had cost me less than what most people here probably spent on a single dinner. I'd learned long ago that expensive didn't always mean better, though that philosophy had never been popular in my family. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Miranda looked radiant in her designer gown, and her new husband James seemed genuinely happy. I sat in the third row with the rest of the cousins, listening to vows about love, commitment, and building a life together. During the ring exchange, I noticed my parents several rows ahead, my father checking his Rolex while my mother whispered something to my Aunt Barbara. The Whitmore family, that's us, had always been obsessed with appearances. My father, Robert Whitmore, owned a successful insurance brokerage that had been in the family for 3 generations. My mother, Patricia, served on the boards of several local charities and took pride in maintaining what she called proper standards. They lived in a colonial mansion in the historic district, drove matching silver Audis, and had very specific ideas about success. Those ideas had never included their youngest son driving a beat-up Honda and living in a modest apartment downtown. After the ceremony, guests moved to the reception hall for cocktails. The room was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course, crystal chandeliers, and tables set with china that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. A string quartet played softly in one corner while servers in black ties circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I was talking with my cousin Derek about his new job in Boston when I felt a familiar presence behind me. "Tyler, there you are." My mother appeared at my elbow, her smile tight and practiced. "Come, I want you to meet the Blackwoods. James's parents are such lovely people, and his father owns that new tech company everyone's talking about." She guided me across the room to where a distinguished couple in their 50s stood chatting with other guests. Jonathan Blackwood had the confident posture of someone accustomed to being the most successful person in the room, while his wife Eleanor wore diamonds that caught the light with every gesture. Jonathan, Eleanor, I'd like you to meet my youngest son, Tyler, my mother said, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she was trying to manage impressions. He's still finding his path. The phrase stung, though I kept my expression neutral. Jonathan shook my hand with a firm grip, his eyes already scanning the room for more interesting conversations. Eleanor smiled politely and asked what I did. For work. I'm in consulting, I replied, which was technically true, though it barely scratched the surface of what my days actually involved. How nice, Eleanor said in the way that people do when they're not really listening. And what kind of consulting is that? Before I could answer, my father appeared beside us, apparently having overheard enough of the conversation to feel the need to intervene. Tyler helps small businesses with their various needs, he said, the pause before various needs somehow making it sound vaguely suspicious. Dad, I started, but he was already steering the conversation in a different direction. Jonathan, I heard about your company's acquisition last month. Brilliant move expanding into the European market. My father had a talent for pivoting away from topics he found embarrassing, and apparently my career fell squarely into that category. The conversation continued around me for another few minutes before the Blackwoods excused themselves to find their table. As they walked away, my mother turned to me with that familiar expression of disappointment. Tyler, couldn't you have prepared something more impressive to say about your work? Consulting sounds so vague. It's what I do, Mom. But you could. Make it sound more substantial. The Blackwoods are very successful people. Jonathan's company went public last year. My father nodded in agreement. Your mother's right, son. Presentation matters in situations like this. Speaking of which, I noticed that car you drove here today. He glanced toward the windows that overlooked the parking lot. That Honda of yours is looking pretty rough. Maybe it's time to consider an upgrade. The car runs fine, Dad. Running and making a good impression are two different things. He replied. What kind of message does that send about your consulting business? Before I could respond, the wedding coordinator announced that dinner was being served. We found our assigned table, number 12, which put us somewhere in the middle of the family hierarchy, but definitely not with the VIP crowd near the head table. I ended up seated between my Aunt Barbara and a family friend whose name I couldn't remember, while my parents took seats across from me. The dinner conversation flowed around topics I'd heard countless times before: property values in different neighborhoods, vacation destinations that demonstrated the right level of sophistication, and which private schools were currently considered the best investments. My Aunt Barbara spent 10 minutes describing her recent kitchen renovation, complete with Italian marble countertops and appliances that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Tyler, you really should consider moving back to the Heights, she said during a lull in the conversation. That apartment of yours downtown is so urban. And with your consulting work, wouldn't it make more sense to be closer to the kind of clientele who could afford proper fees? I like where I live, I said simply. It's convenient for work, and the neighborhood has character. My mother made a sound that might have been agreement, but definitely wasn't. Character is fine, dear, but at some point you have to think about building equity. Your father and I have been discussing it, and we think it might be time for you to consider a career change. Something more established. Like what? Well, your cousin Derek just made partner at his law firm, and Miranda's friend Jessica started her own marketing agency last year. She's already hiring employees. My mother's voice took on that wistful quality it got when she talked about other people's children. There are so many opportunities for someone with your education. The implication hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar. I had the education, master's degree from a good school, internships at respectable firms. But somehow I'd failed to translate that into the kind of success that looked impressive at country club dinner tables. Dessert arrived as the sun was setting over the golf course, painting the reception hall in golden light. The wedding cake was a masterpiece of sugar architecture, 4 tiers decorated with real flowers and enough detail to qualify as art. As Miranda and James cut the first slice, cameras flashed and guests applauded. That's when my father decided to continue our earlier conversation. "Tyler, I've been thinking about what we discussed earlier, about that car of yours." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if he was about to share confidential information. "I know a dealer who could get you into something more appropriate. Nothing too flashy, but something that won't embarrass the family at events like this. Dad, I appreciate the offer, but I don't need a new car." "Son, sometimes it's not about what we need. It's about what's expected." He gestured around the elegant reception hall. "Look at this room. Look at these people. Everyone here understands that success has to be visible to be respected." My mother nodded emphatically. "Your father's absolutely right. And with Miranda married now, you're the next generation people will be watching. What kind of example are you setting?" The question felt heavier than it should have, loaded with years of similar conversations and gentle disappointments. I'd spent most of my adult life hearing variations of the same theme, that I wasn't quite measuring up to the family standards, that my choices reflected poorly on everyone else, that success was primarily about appearances. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The band started playing after dinner, and couples moved onto the polished dance floor. I watched Miranda and James share their first dance as husband and wife, spinning slowly under the chandeliers while photographers captured every angle. The sight should have been purely romantic, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything here was performative, designed to create the perfect impression rather than celebrate genuine emotion. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it discreetly, seeing a message from Marcus Chen, one of my business partners. "Tokyo deal closed. Numbers are even better than projected. Celebration tomorrow?" I smiled slightly and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Marcus had been working on that acquisition for 6 months, and its success meant our quarterly projections would exceed expectations by nearly 30%. But explaining that to my parents would require revealing details I wasn't ready to share. "Tyler, you should ask someone to dance," my Aunt Barbara suggested, nodding toward the dance floor where several of Miranda's single friends were swaying to the music. "That brunette in the green dress is a pediatrician. Very accomplished young woman. Maybe later, Aunt Barbara. Don't wait too long, dear. At your age, the good ones get snatched up quickly." She patted my arm in what was meant to be an encouraging gesture, but felt more like sympathy. My father had moved to the bar with Jonathan Blackwood and several other men, their conversation animated with hand gestures and the kind of laughter that usually accompanied talk about golf handicaps or stock portfolios. I could see him glancing in my direction occasionally, probably explaining away his disappointment of a son to the group. The evening progressed with the familiar rhythm of wedding receptions. Speeches were made, toasts were raised, and the older generation gradually migrated to quieter corners while younger guests claimed the dance floor. I found myself in conversations with relatives I saw once or twice a year, each interaction following predictable patterns. My cousin Derek cornered me near the dessert table, his face flushed from champagne and dancing. "Tyler, man, you've got to tell me the truth. What's really going on with this consulting thing? Because no offense, but you're living like you're barely scraping by, and I know you're too smart for that to be the whole story." Derek had always been more perceptive than the rest of the family gave him credit for. We'd grown up together, spent summers at the same camps, and he'd known me long enough to recognize when something didn't add up. "It's complicated," I said, which was both true and completely unhelpful. "Come on, we used to tell each other everything when we were kids. Remember when you figured out how to hack into the school's computer system in 8th grade? You were always 3 steps ahead of everyone else." I had forgotten about that incident. It seemed like a lifetime ago, back when my technical abilities had impressed rather than concerned my family. That was different. We were kids. Yeah, but you still had that same look you get now. Like you know something the rest of us don't. Derek studied my face in the dim light of the reception hall. Whatever you're really doing, it's working, isn't it? I mean, working better than you're letting anyone know. Before I could respond, my mother appeared beside us, having apparently spotted our private conversation from across the room. Boys, you're being antisocial hiding over here. Derek, your mother was looking for you. And Tyler, the Blackwood's daughter just arrived from graduate school. I thought you might like to meet her. Derek shot me a look that said our conversation wasn't over, then dutifully went to find his mother. I allowed mine to guide me across the room to where a young woman in an elegant black dress was talking with Miranda near the head table. Sarah, I'd like you to meet my son Tyler, my mother said, her voice taking on that bright, slightly artificial tone she used when matchmaking. Tyler, this is Sarah Blackwood. She just finished her MBA at Wharton. Sarah was attractive in the polished way that seemed to be required at events like this. Perfectly styled blonde hair, understated jewelry, and the kind of confident smile that came from a lifetime of advantages. We shook hands and exchanged pleasantries about the wedding and her recent graduation. What line of work are you in? She asked, the question that inevitably came up in conversations with strangers. Business consulting, I replied, sticking to my standard vague response. What kind of businesses do you work with? The question was more specific than most people bothered to ask, and I found myself genuinely considering how to answer. Primarily, technology companies looking to expand internationally, some mergers and acquisitions work. That sounds fascinating. Are you working with any companies I might have heard of? I glanced around the reception hall, noting the number of people within earshot. A few, but nothing I can really discuss. In detail. Confidentiality agreements. Sarah nodded, understanding. Of course. The discretion required in consulting can be challenging. You must travel quite a bit for that kind of work. Some, I said, though some was a significant understatement. In the past month alone, I'd been to San Francisco twice, London once, and had a video conference at 3 a.m. with a development team in Singapore. The conversation continued, for several more minutes, touching on business school, career goals, and the usual topics that people discuss when they're being politely evaluated as potential romantic interests. Sarah was intelligent and well-educated, exactly the kind of person my mother hoped I'd end up with. Under different circumstances, I might have asked for her number, but as we talked, I found myself thinking about the text message from Marcus, and the deal that had just closed in Tokyo, and the meeting I had scheduled for Monday morning with a venture capital firm in Boston. My life was full of details that didn't fit the narrative my family had constructed about their underachieving son. The band announced the last dance of the evening, and couples gathered on the dance floor for a slow song. Sarah was claimed by a college friend, and I found myself alone near the windows that overlooked the country club's grounds. The parking lot was still full of expensive cars gleaming under the security lights. My father approached, loosening his tie after an evening of networking and socializing. He looked tired but satisfied, the way he always did after events where he'd successfully maintained the family's social standing. Good wedding, he said, standing beside me at the window. Miranda looked beautiful, and the Blackwoods seemed like good people. Jonathan and I are going to play golf next week. That's nice, Dad. You seem to hit it off with their daughter. Sarah's a bright young woman, good family, excellent education. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The kind of person who could be a real asset to someone looking to build a serious career. The implication was clear. Sarah represented the kind of life my parents wanted for me, complete with the right social connections and shared expectations. About success. It was the same conversation we'd been having in various forms for years. She seems very nice, I said, which was true, but non-committal. Tyler, I know you think your mother and I are too concerned with appearances, but there's more to it than that. My father's voice took on a more serious tone. The relationships you build, the impression you make, the community you're part of, these things matter more than you might realize. They open doors that talent alone sometimes can't. I turned to look at him, seeing genuine concern behind the usual lectures about respectability and social standing. For a moment, I considered telling him everything. About the company I'd built, the deals we'd closed, the success that nobody in the family knew about. But something held me back. I understand what you're saying, Dad. Do you? Because sometimes I wonder if you're deliberately limiting yourself out of some misguided principle. There's no shame in wanting nice things or in working toward a lifestyle that reflects your capabilities. He gestured toward the elegant reception hall around us. This is what success looks like, son. This is what you could have if you'd just apply yourself properly. The irony was almost painful. I was already more successful than anyone at this wedding realized, including the hosts. But explaining that would require revealing decisions I'd made, risks I'd taken, and a whole second life I'd been carefully keeping separate from family expectations. Maybe you're right, I said, which seemed to satisfy him for the moment. The evening was winding down. Guests were beginning to say their goodbyes, collecting coats and small purses from the coat check. Miranda and James had already departed in a shower of rice and congratulations, heading to their honeymoon suite before flying to Italy in the morning. My mother found me near the exit, her earlier energy replaced by the fatigue that comes after hours of social performance. "Such a lovely evening," she said, though I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Did you enjoy yourself?" "It was beautiful." Miranda looked happy. "She did, and James seems like he'll take good care of her." My mother adjusted her wrap against the evening air. "I hope you gave some thought to what your father and I discussed earlier, about the car and about considering some changes in your approach to things." "I'll think about it, Mom." She smiled and kissed my cheek, the gesture carrying both affection and hope that her wayward son might finally be ready to meet the family's expectations. As guests filed out of the country club, I watched. The valet attendants retrieve car after car from the parking lot. BMWs, Mercedes, Audis, and Teslas appeared in procession, their owners tipping the valets before driving off into the Connecticut night. When my turn came, the young valet looked slightly embarrassed as he jogged toward the far corner of the lot, where my Honda Civic sat alone, looking even more shabby next to the luxury vehicles that surrounded it. My parents were still saying goodbye to other relatives when he brought the car around. The engine's familiar rattle seemed louder in the quiet evening air, and I noticed my father wince slightly at the sound. "Get that looked at, son," he called as I got into the driver's seat. "At least make sure it's safe to drive." I nodded and waved, then drove slowly out of the country club's circular driveway. In my rearview mirror, I could see my parents standing under the elegant entrance lights, probably discussing their disappointment in their youngest son's stubborn refusal to embrace a more appropriate lifestyle. If they only knew what was waiting for me in 3 hours. The drive home took me through the quiet streets of Riverside Heights, past the colonial mansions and perfectly manicured lawns that represented everything my family valued. Street lamps cast pools of yellow light on sidewalks where no one ever walked, and driveways held cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. This was the world I'd grown up in, but it had never felt like home. My apartment was 15 miles away in downtown Hartford, in a converted warehouse district that had been transformed into lofts and creative spaces over the past decade. The neighborhood had character: brick buildings with industrial windows, small restaurants that stayed open late, and the kind of energy that came from people actually building something rather than just maintaining appearances. I parked the Honda in my assigned spot in the underground garage, its rattling engine echoing off concrete walls before finally falling silent. The sound would have mortified my parents, but it had become oddly comforting to me. This car had been with me through some of the most important years of my life, even if no one knew why those years mattered. My apartment occupied the entire fourth floor of the building, though I'd never mentioned that detail to my family. They assumed I lived in a typical one-bedroom rental, struggling to make ends meet on whatever consulting income I could scrape together. The reality was 3,000 square feet of open space with exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a home office equipped with technology that would make most Fortune 500 companies envious. I loosened my tie and poured myself a glass of scotch, a 25-year-old single malt that had cost more than my car payment. Through the windows, downtown Hartford sparkled with lights from office buildings where people worked late into the night, chasing their own versions of success. My phone buzzed with several messages I'd missed during the wedding reception. Marcus Chen had sent photos from Tokyo, showing our team celebrating the acquisition deal at a rooftop bar overlooking the city skyline. Elena Rodriguez, our head of European operations, had forwarded contracts from 3 new clients in Germany who wanted to expand into North American markets. And David Kim, my partner who handled the technical side of our business, had sent a cryptic message. "The big announcement is ready when you are." That announcement was going to change everything. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, checking the secure server where we stored our most sensitive information. The files represented 4 years of careful planning, strategic investments, and calculated risks that had paid off beyond my wildest expectations. What had started as a small consulting firm working with local tech startups had evolved into something much larger. Our company, Meridian Strategic Partners, had facilitated over $2 billion in international acquisitions in the past 18 months alone. We specialized in helping American technology companies expand into Asian and European markets, while simultaneously assisting foreign firms in establishing North American operations. The complexity of these deals required expertise in international law, cultural understanding, technical integration, and financial structures that most consulting firms couldn't provide. But we could, because I'd spent 3 years building a network of specialists who were the best in their respective fields. Marcus handled Asian markets from our office in Singapore. Elena managed European operations from London. David oversaw all technical integrations from our Boston location. And I coordinated everything from Hartford, a city nobody expected to be home to a company operating on this scale. The anonymity had been intentional. While my competitors in New York and San Francisco fought for attention and recognition, we'd built our reputation on discretion and results. Our clients paid premium fees for our ability to close deals without media coverage, regulatory complications, or competitive interference. In the world of international business, invisibility was often more valuable than fame. I pulled up the financial reports for the 3rd quarter, numbers that would have shocked my parents into speechlessness. Our revenue had grown by 340% compared to the same period last year. My personal compensation package included salary, profit sharing, and equity stakes that had made me wealthier than anyone at that wedding reception realized. The Honda Civic wasn't a sign of financial struggle. It was a choice, a deliberate decision to maintain the appearance of modest success while building something extraordinary. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family worried about my lack of ambition, I was about to announce the largest deal in our company's history. A consortium of European investors wanted to acquire a controlling stake in Meridian Strategic Partners, valuing the company at $850 million. The offer would make each of the 4 founding partners extremely wealthy, but more importantly, it would give us the resources to expand into markets we'd only dreamed about accessing. My phone rang, the caller ID showing David's number from Boston. "Tell me you're not having second thoughts," he said without preamble. "About which part?" "Any of it. The acquisition offer, the press conference on Monday, finally letting people know what we've actually built here." David's voice carried the excitement he'd been trying to contain for weeks. Marcus called me after the Tokyo celebration. He said watching that team celebrate made him realize we've been hiding our success for too long. I swirled the scotch in my glass, considering his words. There's a difference between privacy and hiding. Is there? When's the last time you told your family what you actually do for work? The question hit closer to home than I'd expected. They wouldn't understand. They'd understand the results. Tyler, we're about to announce that a 4-person consulting firm based in Hartford has become one of the most successful international business facilitators on the East Coast. Your parents are going to find out eventually. He was right, of course. The acquisition announcement would generate significant media attention, at least within business circles. Trade publications would run profiles of the founding partners. Financial networks would analyze the deal structure. And anyone who Googled my name would discover that their disappointment of a son had been building something remarkable while they worried about his beat-up Honda. The lawyers finalized everything? I asked. Signed and sealed. The European consortium gets 60% equity, we retain management control, and each founding partner walks away with enough money to buy small countries. David's laughter carried through. The phone. Elena's already looking at office space in Prague. Marcus wants to open a subsidiary in Australia. And I'm thinking about that research lab we've been discussing. After hanging up with David, I walked to the windows that overlooked the city. Hartford wasn't Silicon Valley or Wall Street, but it had advantages that flashier locations couldn't offer. Lower overhead costs, access to major transportation hubs, and a business environment that allowed companies to focus on growth rather than appearances. The same principles applied to my personal life. While my family attended charity galas and country club events, I'd been building relationships with executives in 12 countries who trusted Meridian strategic partners to handle their most sensitive transactions. While they worried about social standing and visible success, I'd been creating actual value that would benefit everyone involved. My phone buzzed with another message from Marcus. Private jet is fueled and ready. Flight plan filed for Monday morning departure to Boston. You sure you don't want to upgrade your ground transportation for the press conference? I smiled at his gentle teasing. Marcus knew about my Honda, and like the others, he understood it. Was part of a larger strategy. But he also knew that Monday's announcement would change the dynamics of maintaining that strategy. The European investors had insisted on a press conference to announce the acquisition, partly for regulatory reasons, and partly because they wanted to demonstrate the credibility of their newest portfolio company. Photos would be taken, interviews would be conducted, and my carefully maintained privacy would become much harder to protect. I typed back, ground transportation will be fine, but make sure the jet is ready for the return flight. I have a feeling. Monday is going to be a long day. Setting my phone aside, I opened my laptop and began reviewing the presentation materials David had prepared for the press conference. The numbers were impressive even by Silicon Valley standards, and the growth projections for the merged company suggested we were just getting started. The acquisition would provide access to European markets we'd been approaching cautiously, while the consortium's connections in Asia would complement Marcus's existing relationships. More importantly, their capital would allow us to pursue opportunities that had been beyond our reach as a self-funded startup. I thought about the conversation with my father at the wedding reception, his concerns about my career trajectory, and his advice about building the right kind of success. In some ways, he'd been right about the importance of relationships and community connections. The difference was that I'd built those relationships in boardrooms in Singapore and London, rather than golf courses in Connecticut. The weekend passed quietly. I avoided family phone calls, knowing that rehashing the wedding reception would inevitably lead to more lectures about my choices and lifestyle. Instead, I focused on final preparations for Monday's announcement and the changes it would bring to everything I'd carefully constructed over the past 4 years. Sunday evening, I received a call from Elena in London. The European investors had requested a final video conference before the press announcement, wanting to review logistics and message coordination. They're excited, Elena reported. Stefan mentioned that our client retention rate was unlike anything they'd seen in the consulting sector. Apparently, most firms lose 30% of their clients annually, while we've only lost 2 clients in 4 years. Both of which were acquired by larger clients of ours, I pointed out. Exactly. We don't just provide services, we create ecosystems. That's what convinced them this was worth $850 million. After the call, I sat in my home office looking at the city lights and thinking about the path that had led to this moment. 4 years ago, I'd been a recent graduate with an MBA and some experience in international business development. The consulting firm I'd joined out of school had been prestigious but bureaucratic, more concerned with billable hours than actual results. Starting Meridian Strategic Partners had been a risk. That terrified my parents, though they'd never known the full scope of what I was attempting. They'd seen their son leave a stable corporate job to start a small consulting practice, and they'd been waiting for years for me to admit failure and return to conventional employment. Instead, I'd built something that would be featured in Harvard Business School case studies. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so personal. Tomorrow, while I announced the largest business success of my career, my parents would probably be at their country club discussing their concern about my lack of ambition and their embarrassment about my transportation choices. But that was about to change in ways none of us expected. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Hartford feel electric with possibility. I stood in my apartment, adjusting my tie in front of the bathroom mirror. The same navy suit I'd worn to the wedding, though today it would be photographed by financial journalists and broadcast on business networks across 3 continents. My phone showed 17 missed calls, most from numbers I didn't recognize. Word of the press conference had leaked over the weekend, and reporters were scrambling to understand how a consulting firm based in Hartford had attracted the attention of European venture capitalists to the tune of nearly $1 billion. The key. Preparation for this day had taken months of legal coordination, regulatory filings, and strategic planning. Our lawyers had worked with securities experts to ensure every disclosure requirement was met. Public relations specialists had crafted messaging that would position Meridian Strategic Partners as a serious player in international business consulting while protecting our clients' confidentiality. I grabbed my keys and headed for the garage, where the Honda Civic waited for what would likely be its final appearance in my professional life. The engine turned over with its familiar reluctant cough, and I couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of driving this car to announce one of the largest consulting acquisitions of the year. The drive to Bradley International Airport took 40 minutes through Monday morning traffic. I'd made this trip dozens of times over the past few years, usually departing for meetings in cities where million-dollar decisions were made in glass-walled conference rooms. But today felt different, heavier with implications that extended far beyond business. Airport security recognized me from previous flights, though they had no idea about the significance of today's journey. Private aviation had become routine for international client meetings, but the Gulfstream waiting on the tarmac represented something beyond mere convenience. It was a symbol of success that my family had never imagined I possessed. Captain Richardson greeted me at the aircraft stairs, his professional smile carrying a hint of curiosity about the unusual media attention surrounding today's flight. Mr. Whitmore, we're cleared for immediate departure. Flight time to Boston will be approximately 38 minutes. The cabin was configured for business meetings, with leather seats that could swivel to face a conference table, satellite internet, and communication systems that allowed for secure international calls at 35,000 feet. I'd held negotiations worth hundreds of millions of dollars in this same space, but today, I simply needed the quiet to prepare for questions I'd never answered publicly before. As Hartford disappeared below us, I reviewed the press materials one final time. The acquisition announcement was straightforward. European Investment Consortium acquires majority stake in Connecticut-based consulting firms specializing in international business development. The complexity lay in explaining how 4 people had built something valued at $850 million while maintaining almost complete anonymity. David Kim had prepared a presentation that walked through our growth trajectory without revealing specific client information. Marcus Chen would join via video link from Singapore, where it was already evening. Elena Rodriguez was flying in from London and would arrive at Logan Airport 30 minutes before the press conference began. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant, Jennifer. Media list is up to 47 outlets. WSJ wants exclusive. Interview after the announcement. Bloomberg is sending their senior M&A correspondent. And your mother called the office 3 times asking if you're available for lunch today. The last part made me pause. My mother had never called my office before, primarily because she'd never been entirely sure what my office actually did. The timing suggested she'd heard something about today's announcement, though I couldn't imagine how news of a business press conference would have reached her social circles. 25 minutes into the flight, my phone rang with a call from Derek, my cousin who'd sensed something unusual at the wedding reception. "Tyler, what the hell is going on?" His voice carried a mixture of excitement and confusion. "My assistant just showed me a news alert about some massive business deal involving Tyler Whitmore from Connecticut. Please tell me that's you and not some coincidence." I'd been dreading this conversation. "It's me." Jesus Christ. The article says you're announcing the sale of your consulting company for almost $1 billion. $1 billion, Tyler. With a B. The acquisition is for $850 million, and it's not exactly a sale. We're retaining operational control and 40% equity. Silence stretched across the connection before Derek spoke again, his voice quieter. "How long have you been building this?" 4 years. 4 years. While we've all been worried about your Honda and your downtown apartment, you've been building a company worth nearly $1 billion. Something like that. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you tell me? The question I'd been avoiding for months, maybe years. Because I needed to focus on building it rather than explaining it. And because I paused, looking out the aircraft window at clouds that stretched to the horizon. Because I wasn't sure anyone would understand the choices I was making. "Tyler, your parents are going to lose their minds when they find out." "I know." "No, I don't think you do." "Your dad was lecturing people at the bar Saturday night about how you needed to get serious about your career, and your mom spent 20 minutes telling my mother about how worried she is that you're wasting your potential." The irony was almost too much to process. While I'd been negotiating deals that would reshape how American companies approached international expansion, my parents had been apologizing to relatives for their underachieving son. "Derek, I need to ask you for a favor." "Anything. Don't tell them. Not until after the press conference. I want them to hear it officially." "You're going to call them after the announcement?" I considered the question, thinking about conversations that had been building toward this moment for years. Actually, I think they deserve to hear it in person. The Gulf Stream began its descent into Boston, the city's skyline growing larger through the windows. Logan Airport's private aviation terminal was already busy with morning departures, corporate jets carrying executives to meetings that would determine the direction of companies, markets, and careers. Elena was waiting in the terminal when I arrived, her London flight having landed 15 minutes earlier. She looked every inch the successful international businesswoman she'd become. Designer suit, confident posture, and the kind of presence that made people assume she was in charge of whatever room she entered. "Ready for this?" she asked as we walked toward the ground transportation area. "As ready as anyone can be for publicly dismantling 4 years of careful privacy," she laughed. "Think of it as transitioning from stealth mode to growth mode. The European consortium didn't invest $850 million so we could continue operating in secret." The ride into downtown Boston took us through neighborhoods I'd visited dozens of times for client meetings and industry conferences. The city had become a second home over the past few years, though I'd always been just another consultant in a suit. Unremarkable among the thousands of business professionals who moved through its financial district daily. Today would be different. The Four Seasons Hotel had provided a conference room that could accommodate the expected media turnout while maintaining the professional atmosphere our European partners required. Security personnel were already screening journalists and setting up equipment that would broadcast our announcement across financial networks in real time. David met us in the lobby, his usual technical precision replaced by nervous energy. "Everything's ready upstairs." Marcus tested the video link from Singapore. Quality is perfect. The lawyers reviewed our talking points one final time, and Stefan Andersson arrived from Stockholm this morning to represent the consortium. Stefan Andersson was the managing partner of Nordic Capital Ventures, the lead investor in the consortium that would soon own 60% of everything I'd built. We'd spent months negotiating the acquisition terms, but this would be our first meeting in person rather than through video conferences and secure document exchanges. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of understated confidence that came from managing billions in investment capital. His handshake was firm, his English accented but precise, and his questions about the press conference logistics suggested someone accustomed to high-stakes public announcements. "Mr. Whitmore, I want you to know that Nordic Capital Ventures has rarely encountered a company with your combination of growth potential and operational excellence," he said as we reviewed the presentation materials. "Your client retention rates are extraordinary, but more importantly, your ability to facilitate complex international transactions while maintaining complete discretion has impressed our due diligence team." The compliment felt surreal. 4 years ago, I'd been a recent MBA graduate whose parents worried about his career prospects. Now, one of Europe's most successful venture capitalists was praising work I'd done while my family assumed I was struggling to find my direction in life. 20 minutes before the press conference began, my phone rang with a call from an unexpected source. My father. "Tyler, I just received the strangest call from Jonathan Blackwood," he said without preamble. "He claims he saw your name in some business journal article about a major acquisition announcement happening today in Boston. He wanted to know if you were related to the Tyler Whitmore mentioned in the article." My heart rate increased slightly. "What did you tell him?" "I told him there must be some mistake, obviously. But Tyler, this article mentions a consulting company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and it lists the founder's name as Tyler J. Whitmore from Connecticut." The middle initial was accurate, though I'd never mentioned it in family conversations. "Dad, I can't really talk right now, I'm in a meeting." "Son, are you in some kind of trouble? Because if someone is using your name fraudulently—" "I'm not in trouble, Dad, but I really can't discuss this over the phone." "Tyler, you're starting to worry me. Where are you right now?" I looked around the hotel conference room, where journalists were taking their seats and camera crews were adjusting lighting equipment. In 10 minutes, I would walk to a podium and announce the largest business success of my career to an audience. That included reporters from the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg News, and Financial Times. "I'm in Boston, Dad, and I promise I'll explain everything later today." "Boston? What are you doing in Boston on a Monday morning?" Before I could answer, David appeared at my elbow, pointing toward the podium where Stefan Andersson was already taking his position. "I have to go, Dad, but save some time this evening. I'm going to drive up to the house after I get back from Boston, and we need to talk." "Tyler, trust me, Dad. Everything is going to make sense very soon." I ended the call and followed Elena toward the front of the room, where dozens of cameras were now focused on the podium. In a few minutes, the anonymity I'd maintained for 4 years would disappear forever, replaced by public recognition of success my family had never imagined possible. The irony was perfect. After years of disappointing my parents with my apparent lack of ambition, I was about to shock them with achievements that exceeded their wildest expectations. The press conference began at exactly 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Stefan Andersson stepped to the podium first, his Swedish accent adding gravity to words that would reshape everything about how people saw Tyler Whitmore. "Ladies and gentlemen, Nordic Capital Ventures is proud to announce our acquisition of a 60% stake in Meridian Strategic Partners, a Connecticut-based international consulting firm that has facilitated over $2 billion in cross-border transactions over the past 18 months. Camera flashes illuminated the room as journalists scribbled notes and photographers captured the moment. I stood to the side of the podium, watching decades of careful anonymity dissolve in real time. The acquisition values Meridian Strategic Partners at $850 million, making it one of the largest consulting firm purchases in the Northeast this decade. The company's founder and CEO, Tyler Whitmore, will retain operational control and continue leading the firm's expansion into new international markets. Stefan stepped aside, and suddenly I was walking toward the podium where 47 media outlets waited for explanations I'd never given publicly before. The room fell silent, except for the click of camera shutters and the hum of video equipment. 4 years ago, I started Meridian Strategic Partners with 3 partners and a simple premise, I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. American. Companies needed better guidance for international expansion, and foreign companies needed more sophisticated support for entering North American markets. We believed we could build bridges between business cultures that often misunderstood each other. I outlined our growth trajectory, the international office network we'd established, and the client relationships that had generated revenue most people couldn't fathom. Marcus appeared on the video screen from Singapore, his technical expertise adding credibility to our claims about facilitating complex transactions across multiple time zones and regulatory environments. Elena spoke about our European operations, the partnerships we'd forged with government agencies in 12 countries, and the technology infrastructure that allowed us to coordinate deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars while maintaining complete client confidentiality. David presented the technical innovations we'd developed, proprietary software that could analyze international market conditions in real time and predict regulatory changes that might affect pending transactions. His presentation included statistics that made several journalists lean forward in their chairs, success rates, client satisfaction scores, and growth projections that belonged in Silicon Valley boardrooms rather than Hartford conference rooms. The Q&A question and answer session lasted 45 minutes. Reporters wanted to understand how a 4-person team had built something worth $850 million while operating from relatively obscure locations. They asked about our client roster, though. We could only provide general industry categories due to confidentiality agreements. They questioned our growth strategy, our competitive advantages, and the reasons Nordic Capital Ventures had chosen to invest such a substantial amount in a company most people had never heard of. Mr. Whitmore, asked the Bloomberg correspondent, your company has maintained an unusually low public profile despite handling transactions worth billions of dollars. Was this anonymity intentional? Discretion is a service we provide to our clients, I replied. Many international transactions succeed precisely because they don't attract media attention or competitive interference. Our clients pay premium fees for results, not publicity. But now that Nordic Capital Ventures has invested $850 million, presumably that discretion will be harder to maintain, Stefan answered from his position beside the podium. The investment will allow Meridian Strategic Partners to pursue opportunities that require greater capital resources while maintaining the operational independence and client confidentiality that made them attractive to us initially. After the press conference ended, I spent another hour in individual interviews with major publications. The Wall Street Journal wanted details about our client acquisition strategy. Financial Times focused on our international expansion plans. Forbes asked about the personal journey from recent MBA graduate to CEO of a company worth nearly $1 billion. By 4:30 p.m., the media obligations were complete. Elena was catching a flight back to London. David was driving to our Boston office to coordinate with the legal team handling acquisition paperwork. Marcus would remain in Singapore, where it was already Tuesday morning and our Asian clients needed updates about the ownership change. I had a different destination. The drive back to Connecticut to face conversations I'd been avoiding for 4 years. The Gulfstream flight to Hartford lasted 32 minutes, but it felt like hours. I spent the time rehearsing explanations for decisions that had seemed logical when made privately, but would probably appear deceptive when revealed to family members who'd been genuinely concerned about my welfare. My phone had accumulated over 60 text messages during the press conference. Derek had sent a screenshot of the Forbes article with a single word: unbelievable. My Aunt Barbara had forwarded a link to the Bloomberg coverage with multiple question marks. 3 cousins I rarely spoke to had suddenly remembered my existence, but nothing from my parents, which somehow felt more ominous than if they'd been calling constantly. The Honda Civic was waiting in the airport parking lot, looking even more absurd after a day spent discussing $850 million acquisitions. The engine started with its familiar reluctant cough, and I drove through Hartford traffic toward Riverside Heights, where my parents were presumably trying to process news reports about their disappointment of a son. Their house looked exactly as it had Saturday night after the wedding: imposing colonial architecture, perfectly maintained landscaping, and matching silver Audis in the circular driveway. But something felt different as I parked the Honda behind my mother's car and walked toward the front door. My father answered before I could ring the doorbell, his expression unreadable. "Tyler." "Hi, Dad." "Your mother is in the living room." "Think we need to talk?" The living room held the same elegant furniture and family photographs it had contained my entire life. But the atmosphere was charged with questions that had been building since Jonathan Blackwood's phone call that morning. My mother sat in her usual chair, her posture rigid with the kind of controlled emotion she'd perfected over decades of social obligations. She held a printed copy of what appeared to be a news article, though I couldn't see the headline from where I stood. "Sit down, Tyler," my father said, his voice carrying none of its usual warmth. I chose the sofa across from my mother, the same spot where I'd received lectures about grades, career choices, and life decisions throughout my childhood and adolescence. "We've been getting phone calls all afternoon," my mother began, her voice carefully modulated. "Friends, neighbors, people from the country club, all asking the same question. Is the Tyler Whitmore mentioned in these business articles our son?" She held up the printed page, which I could now see was the Wall Street Journal's coverage of the acquisition announcement. "And we haven't known how to answer, because the Tyler Whitmore described in these articles doesn't match the son we thought we knew." My father moved to the window that overlooked their backyard, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture I remembered from serious conversations throughout my childhood. "Tyler, these articles describe a man who built a consulting company worth $850 million. They mention international offices, billion-dollar transactions, and partnerships with European investment firms." He turned to face me. "Is this you?" "Yes." The single word hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar. My mother set the article on the coffee table between us. "How long, Tyler? How long have you been building this empire? While we worried about your beat-up car and your modest apartment?" 4 years. 4 years. She repeated the phrase as if testing its weight. 4 years of family dinners where we discussed your lack of direction? 4 years of me making excuses to friends about your unconventional career path? 4 years of your father offering to help you find a more stable position? The pain in... Her voice was worse than anger would have been. "Why didn't you tell us?" my father asked. "Why did you let us believe you were struggling when you were apparently building one of the most successful consulting firms on the East Coast?" I'd prepared for this question during the flight from Boston, but the answer still felt inadequate. Because I needed to focus on building it rather than managing expectations about it. And because... I paused, looking around the living room, where I'd grown up. Because I wasn't sure you'd understand the choices I was making. "What choices?" my mother asked. "The choice to be successful? The choice to build something meaningful? Those aren't difficult choices to understand, Tyler." The choice to do it quietly. The choice to live modestly while reinvesting everything back into the company. The choice to prioritize results over appearances. I gestured toward the elegant room around us. This family has always valued visible success. I chose invisible success until it was substantial enough to matter. My father sat in his usual chair, his expression shifting from confusion to something that might have been admiration. Tyler, the articles mention that you retained 40% ownership and operational control of the company. What does that mean in practical terms? I told them about the acquisition structure, the growth plans, the international expansion that would happen over the next 2 years. I explained about Marcus in Singapore, Elena in London, David in Boston, and the network of specialists we'd assembled to handle transactions that most consulting firms couldn't approach. And your Honda? My mother asked. Was that part of some elaborate deception? It was part of maintaining focus. Every dollar I didn't spend on appearances was a dollar I could invest in building something that mattered. I smiled slightly. Though I'll admit, after today's press conference, driving a car that sounds like it's dying might send the wrong message to new clients. My father stood and walked to the bar cart in the corner of the room, pouring 3 glasses of scotch without asking if we wanted them. To Tyler, he said, raising his glass, for proving that sometimes parents don't know their children as well as they think they do. We drank in silence that felt different from the tension that had filled the room when I arrived. Your cousins are going to have questions, my mother said finally. Derek called 3 times this afternoon asking if we knew about your business activities. Miranda's going to feel silly about all those comments about finding your direction, my father added. And the Blackwoods. He paused. Jonathan called back after the press conference aired on Bloomberg. He wanted to know if you might be interested in consulting for his tech company's European expansion. The irony was perfect. After years of trying to impress the Blackwoods with conventional success, I'd accidentally impress them with unconventional success I'd never intended them to discover. There's something else, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket for the small device I'd been carrying all day. My assistant arranged for a car service to pick me up here in 30 minutes. You're not driving the Honda home? My mother asked. I'm not going home. I'm flying to Singapore tonight for client meetings tomorrow. Marcus has been coordinating a deal that could open up opportunities throughout Southeast Asia, and the acquisition gives us resources to pursue markets we've never been able to access. My father checked his Rolex. It's already Tuesday morning in Singapore, which is why I need to leave soon. I stood and moved toward the window where he'd been standing earlier. But I wanted you both to hear this from me before you read about it in more news articles. My mother joined us at the window, her gaze following mine to where my Honda Civic sat in their circular driveway. I'm proud of you, Tyler, she said quietly. Confused, embarrassed about how wrong we were, but proud. We both are, my father added. Though I have to admit, I'm curious about what kind of car you'll be driving to the next family wedding. Before I could answer, headlights swept across their driveway as a black sedan pulled up behind the Honda. The driver got out and opened the rear door, waiting with the patient professionalism that characterized high-end transportation services. Actually, I said, picking up my jacket from the sofa, I should mention one more thing about tonight's travel arrangements. My parents followed me to the front door, where the sedan waited in their circular driveway. The car service is just for the drive to the airport, I explained as we walked outside. For the flight to Singapore, I'm taking the jet. My father stopped walking. What jet? I smiled and gestured toward the sedan, where my driver was holding the door open. The same jet I took to Boston this morning, the same one I've been using, for international client meetings for the past 2 years. My mother stared at the sedan as if it might transform into something else entirely. Tyler, she said slowly, exactly how successful did you become while we thought you were struggling to make ends meet? I got into the sedan and rolled down the window. Successful enough that this morning, while you were probably still discussing My disappointing career choices. I announced the sale of my company for $850 million to European investors who think we're just getting started. As the sedan pulled out of their driveway, I could see my parents standing under their elegant porch lights, probably trying to reconcile 4 years of worry with the reality of what their youngest son had accomplished while they weren't paying attention. The Honda Civic remained in their driveway, a monument to the assumptions that had defined our relationship for longer than any of us had realized. 20 minutes later, I was climbing the stairs to my private jet, where Captain Richardson waited with flight plans for Singapore, and a schedule that would have me in meetings worth hundreds of millions of dollars before most people in Connecticut had finished their morning coffee. Sometimes the best revenge against low expectations is success so extraordinary that it redefines everything people thought they knew about you. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.